video is Unit 4, Learning Targets 9 through 11 on plant classification. This begins the second part of the unit on plants. So the last bit of these learning targets 9 through 13 will all be concerning plants. Plants are, as the words say here, multicellular autotrophs, photoautotrophs to be exact. Their cell walls are made of cellulose as opposed to chitin, which we saw in fungi, and they are eukaryotic. Goes without saying, and they reproduce sexually. Basic needs of plants. These are kelp in this picture, so not necessarily plants, but they look like plants, so it's close enough. But I like this picture because it kind of shows a lot of the basic needs here in one picture. Some of the basic needs of plants, of course, sunlight is a basic need of a plant. It provides energy for reactions of photosynthesis. Water. Plants need water in order to provide a steady stream of electrons for the light reactions of photosynthesis. Air. Plants need air. They need CO2 in order to make sugar. They need oxygen for cellular respiration. They need other molecules in the air as well. And they need soil. There are ways of growing plants without soil, but for the most part we think of plants and one of their basic needs is soil, because they need to get water and nutrients from the dirt, and those water and nutrients travel up. So that's an important idea here. Water and nutrients travel up the plant, whereas sugar travels down the plant because sugar is made in the leaves. Water and nutrients are found in the soil. Now, the basic plant life cycle, we're going to have a whole learning target concerning this. But plants reproduce sexually. They exist half of their life, or part of their life, in a haploid state, and the other part of their life in a diploid state. This diploid plant produces male and female gametes, and these gametes are sperm and egg. Gametes is just a fancy word for sex cell. And so the plant produces both the sperm and the egg through the process of meiosis. And those haploid gametes combine, creating this diploid zygote, and this is fertilization. And again, we're going to mention this more later, but I want to go ahead and make this clear. It's a very important concept when talking about plants. Meiosis creates the haploid state. And these haploid organisms, or haploid gametes, sperm and the egg, sperm being male and the egg being female, will combine, and that process is called fertilization, creating what's called the zygote, which is a diploid state. And then that diploid will grow up to go through meiosis again and make haploid spores. Didn't say that earlier. Meiosis creates haploid spores. You have a sperm, you have the egg, they combine, fertilization. And this is called, we could draw a line right here in the middle. Actually, it would be kind of not middle-ish, but the plant alternates between the haploid and diploid generation. And so this is called the alternation of generations. And again, a later video will explain this much more in depth, but I want to go ahead and, as it were, plant the seed for this particular idea to make it easier in the future. Speaking of seeds, we do need to talk about the difference between seeds and spores. Spores are these basic structures. You see some of the spores there on the back of this fern leaf. there, these little piles of spores. Sometimes think of them as dust. Their basic structures, usually haploid. They're produced by the sporophyte generation of the plant. Again, sporophyte's a word that we'll be much more familiar with later, but the sporophyte is the diploid generation of the plant. The seeds, on the other hand, are a very complex, self-contained structure, and they're the diploid result of fertilization. They have two parts, a result of a double fertilization event, actually. And the seed actually just essentially acts like a dormant plant, a dormant sporophyte, and it will eventually grow into a plant when given the right conditions, sunlight, water, air, and soil, and it will grow into the full plant. But for now, it's just a dormant version of that plant. So again, seeds and spores, two completely different things, but easy to get mixed up. Vascular versus non-vascular. Vascular means to have vessels or veins, like we would think of veins. Non-vascular plants have no veins. These plants remain very small, like the mosses here shown on the upper left. Zoom in a little bit. These mosses do not have vascular tissue, therefore they remain very small, whereas this sycamore leaf here, sycamore trees are very tall because they have this vascular tissue. You can see the veins in that leaf, and these vascular tissue will transport food and water and nutrients all throughout the plant. This allows plants to grow to great sizes. Plants are some of the largest organisms in the world. Now let's break some categories down. We're going to mention 4 particular categories of plants just quickly, and then go into them in greater detail when we talk about their life cycles. But bryophytes are seedless, non-vascular plants that are able to grow with little or no soil. Just makes them a little different. And they inhabit moist areas. Mosses, liverworts, and hornworts are examples of bryophytes. Seedless, non-vascular plants. Here's a picture of some moss up close, way up close. So you can see this moss is really short, but there are not any veins like we would think of when we think of moss, or when we think of like another plant like an oak tree or something like that. Next are the seedless vascular plants. We will lump them all together and call them ferns. There's several groups of them. Seedless vascular plants, they have strong root systems, so they do need soil in order to grow. Some other examples besides ferns are club mosses and horsetails. We'll get more in depth with them later. This is actually the gametophyte structure of the fern. The gametophyte is the structure that produces the gametes, and we will talk more about that later. Next are gymnosperms, and gymnosperms are cone-bearing plants. These are seed-bearing plants with vascular system, no flowers, but they have shallow root systems. But again, these are like conifers. Conifers is a fun word. It just means that they bear cones. We're familiar with cones. The cone on the right there is normally what we think of when we think of a pine cone, and the one on the left is what I called as a child a baby cone, but it's actually the male cone, and the one on the right is the female cone. And so we'll talk more about that later. And then lastly, angiosperms. These are seed-bearing vascular plants that produce flowers and fruit. The largest variety of plants in the world. Angiosperms are the most successful plants in the world because of their ability to spread and their ability to reproduce quickly. Here's some examples of angiosperms. Almost any plant you can think of is an angiosperm, besides the groups that we've mentioned, which are pretty closed off. All right, a couple other concepts here. Monocot versus dicot. This is another classification of plants. So we have monocots, and a monocot has one monocotyledon, which is where the cot comes from. Cotyledon is this the first leaf that comes from the plant, and so a monocot is a plant that comes up out of the ground with just one little leaf. The veins are usually parallel. They have vascular bundles, which we'll talk more about this, that are usually arranged in kind of a random arrangement. It says complexly arranged here, but they're kind of random. Fibrous root systems, meaning that they just are kind of like this net-like fiber as opposed to a taproot, and their flowers are multiples of 3. Whereas dicots, two cotyledons, think of a bean versus a monocot like corn. You can even tell the difference in their seeds. Their veins are net-like, like a tree. Their vascular bundles are arranged, this very clear arrangement here in the ring, and they have a taproot as well as flowers arranged in multiples of 4 or 5. Now I have a picture here to kind of demonstrate the monocot and dicot difference to look at them. And you can see here that the monocot starts out, you think of like a popcorn kernel or a seed or a corn seed or something like that, because that's what it is. Whereas the one leaf comes from the ground, the cotyledon leaf, and has the fibrous roots. Whereas the dicot, as the two sides grows up, those two sides separate. You've seen this come out of the ground. The plant kind of comes out of the ground brand new. It looks like that. The small plant, those are the cotyledon leaves. Very essential for that first plant to get out of the ground and get the first leaves going. A couple other terms. Annuals versus perennials. An annual is a plant that goes through its entire life cycle in a growing season with only the seeds remaining. So the plant just kind of withers away but leaves its seeds for the next generation. Whereas a perennial has root systems that remain intact between growing seasons. Think of a tree, loses its leaves, kind of goes dormant during the winter, but it reemerges in the spring. The plant doesn't actually go away. Now, this isn't just trees. There are flowers and things that will basically wither all the way to the ground, but leave their roots intact and then grow back up in the spring, kind of reemerge, as it were. And these are called perennials, meaning they just keep coming back.